So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's online and in-person program that's titled Golden Slumbers, California's Dormant Fine Press Scene. Tonight's event is co-presented and co-hosted by the American Printing History Association. It is the 2025 Lieberman Lecture and part of Enduring Impressions, Private Presses and Their Legacies, which is the American Printing History Association's 2025 conference, which many of you, I think, are here for. So welcome. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to get this party started this evening. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of programs and exhibitions like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. We are so delighted and honored to work with the American Printing History Association this evening on this program. They are an important part of the book community, and we're so happy that they're here and you're here. Now, for tonight's program, I'm going to ask Danielle Moon to take the podium for some remarks and to introduce our speaker. But before that, just some logistics. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can use the chat and the Q&A if you have any comments or questions or anything you'd like to share with us. We will have time towards the end of the hour for some conversation, and we'll curate the conversation from you here in the club rooms and from those of you out there on Zoom using the chat and the Q&A. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Danielle Moon, the American Printing History Association's Vice President for Programs. Is that right? That's right. It's right now.
Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see such a big crowd out here and to see some faces that I recognize from the California book environment and printing history in California, especially. And so we're delighted that we could bring this program to you here in the book club. I have not been to this building before. I haven't been here, I don't think, before COVID. So it's so wonderful to see the new space and see some old faces that I remember. And some of you might not remember me, but it's been a while. So welcome, welcome. So it's my pleasure to introduce our Lieberman Lecture. I also wanted to note that this is our 50th anniversary, AFA's 50th anniversary. So this is a really important event for us in terms of looking at the long-term history of this organization and where we want to go and how we need to continue to build our membership and to build a more diverse and younger membership to come into this organization so that, you know, I'm not the 65-year-old trying to, you know, speak to the choir or whatever. But anyway, that aside, I am delighted that Alastair Johnston is here to speak to us tonight. As you all know his work extraordinarily well. He has his most recent book from 2016 was called The Dreaming on the Edge, which was also represented in one of the periodical publications of the Center of I'm sorry for this for where we are here. And he's been a star, a superstar really in the history of printing. And so it's our delight that he is again going to be recognized as our Lieberman Lecture tonight. So please, let's give him a round of applause, and he's going to come up. And if you don't, you need to see some of his work. It's represented in this library and other places. So Alastair, it's your
I have to just get electric here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. All right. And I did print it out because I have to go fast. I've been told that if I go more than 40 minutes, you're all going to be asleep and grumbling, passing out. I'm wondering if there's any wine left. So
At your endurance.
My endurance. All right, now I need the clicker. Here's the clicker. So California, the Mamas and the Papas song, California Dreaming, suggests that we dream of California on a winter's day, which forgets the fact that we have cold winters and cold summers too. So I thought the Beatles song title, Golden Slumbers, was a more apt analogy for the state of fine printing in California. And we have been known as a state of innovators, from Adolf Sutro, who dynamited his way through the Sierra Nevada, to today's tech bros, male and female, who pioneered the internet, online marketing, forums for digital payment, ways to meet and antagonize total strangers.
Go ahead and just click on the trackpad on the screen and then hit an arrow key and then the click will work.
Hit the arrow key. There we are. Okay, as I seem to be preaching, here's a little homily about the world of digital technology. I have a good friend who was in on the tech boom at the start. She coined the phrase digital darkroom for Adobe Photoshop. She was in on the launch of Netscape. She edited the Mac Bible from Poltroon Press, and when they were able to wrest it away from the original author, she hired me to write the typography chapters, which is why I get all the editions that come out with nice residual checks, although the Japanese one, I pity those people trying to make sense of what I said about typography in there. She's now retired to Humboldt County, and I wrote to her and asked her if she would edit a book for me, because she's a fiend of a copy editor. And after a few months, I hadn't heard. So I said, have you had a look at my book? And she said, I can't do anything. I'm stuck doom scrolling. So that's sort of the state of the brave minds who pioneered the internet. And we've all been sucked into the maw of this doom scrolling. So I'm going to look at some what I consider stumbling blocks in the history of the book in California, as well as, of course, some highlights. The first press in the state came around the Horn to Monterey, and from Boston, arrived in 1832, which is quite recently, actually, when you think about it. Augustine Zamorano paid $460, and he got some worn Burgess type, shaded titling, and the necessary fixtures of a fourth-rate printing office. He printed flyers advertising his prices in pesos and reals, as this was a Spanish territory. In fact, the governor, Mariano Chico, issued a proclamation on 24th of July, 1836, warning that the insolent colonists of the Department of Texas had imprisoned our exalted president, General Santa Anna. We should rise up, but he's probably free by now, given his own strength. Without doubt, the loss has been ere this repaired, he says, which I think is a rather lackadaisical call to arms. California was indeed a sleepy backwater, but once the white settlers arrived, and remember, todos somos ilegales, there were rival papers, one run by Mormons that called the California Star, which had a print run of maybe 100 copies. They attempted to oust the earlier paper, the Californian, with a war of words, calling the editors lickspittles. Eventually, the two papers were forced to merge. And after the gold rush, more papers entered the fray until every mining town had their own, because the miners actually were a very literate bunch. And I just read that often they would amuse themselves with reading Shakespeare aloud. So they weren't the rough and tumble crew you imagine. After California had been admitted to the Union in 1850, there was a period when the lawlessness of San Francisco was tamed by vigilance committees who perpetrated hangings, expulsions, and threats. Newspapers lived and died on their stance on racism and slavery, and anti-Chinese sentiment ran high also. By 1856, there were 5 active newspapers in San Francisco. As far as real printing, you can judge for yourself the typography of this, the first novel printed in California. We're only going to look at the title page. The first line, you will not believe this, is, "It was a dark and stormy night." W.W. Elliott were a famous lithography company, and they produced these bird's eye views of cities like this one of Hangtown. And you'll notice they even have the little navigational arrows on the bottom. They must have pioneered that. You can see that, but go back, refresh, enlarge, all of that. It's wonderful. Here's their guide to the grand and sublime scenery of the Sierra Nevada. At this point in the 19th century, lithography was far more advanced artistically than letterpress, yet we don't consider lithographed books to be fine printing. The first printer of note in the state was Edward Bosky, a Canadian-born engraver and printer. He came for the gold rush as a teenager, as so many others did, and he quickly made his name as an artist, produced a monumental work on California viticulture in 1877, Grapes and Grapevines of California, illustrated by Hannah Millard with 10 plates, which involved up to 28 lithographic stones each. He did engraving, lithography, and even tipped in real photographs, giving his work strong visual appeal. He built a successful business shown here in a stereo view by Mybridge. If you cross your eyes, you'll get to see the people in the foreground in 3D. But it burned down in 1893, and 4 years later, his home burned, containing much of his art. Bosky shared these 517 Clay Street premises with the Women's Cooperative Printing Union. At first, they were owned by Agnes Peterson, which seems antithetical to the idea of a co-op, but times were hard. There was a shortage of compositors in San Francisco, as many young men had fled to the gold fields. They deserted their posts at the type stand to go dig for gold. And women came from the East Coast to find work as typesetters, as that paid more than needlework or other industries accessible to girls and women. However, the Typographical Union refused to let them work, despite the shortage of compositors. Women started their own businesses, and they printed literature for female suffrage and spiritualist movement, which was big at the time. And tedious as the work appears, I defy anybody on a deadline to set a table like that one lower right. There's pages and pages of that stuff. Mind-numbing composition work, which obviously you can't not pay attention if you're going to set that. I did find one nicely bound book produced by the Women's Co-op, and that's this visit to Japan, but it's very undistinguished typographically. Susan Bancroft. There was not much in the way of literature for those early printers to exercise their art upon. The East Coast is already Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman, there's all sorts of stuff going on there. However, Bosky did produce Charles Warren Stoddard's poems for Anton Roman and Co. in 1867, and this is considered the first piece of fine printing in the state. Although, as an editor, I started reading this. Read up there, while the world goes jogging on, presently I miss you. Life is made of other stuff than your limpid tissue. Really, Charles? Get the red pen out on that. But for the first time in the state, Bosky used old style, or accurate, to be more accurate, old face type, which had come back into vogue in England at the Chiswick Press in the 1840s. He used Franklin old style in this book with large margins and beautiful woodcut illustrations, wood engravings by William Keith, Scottish-born artist who was a well-known painter of California. It's the first mention of Yosemite and also Tamalpais in a poem too. Stoddard started writing poetry as a lad, calling himself Pip Pepperpod. He was sickly, and after an unsuccessful career in acting, traveled to the South Seas, where he wrote homoerotic verse called South Sea Idylls. The Chronicle hired him as a travel correspondent, and he traveled the world for 5 years, visiting Egypt and Palestine. He also edited the Overland Monthly with Ina Coolbrith and Bret Hart. He was openly gay and apparently had an affair with Yone Noguchi. One of his scarcest publications must be this brochure, A Trip to Hawaii, first published in 1892 by the Oceanic Steamship Company and reprinted in 1901. It's also Bancroft Library copy. The WASP was founded in 1876 by the Corbell brothers, refugees from Bohemia, who made redwood cigar boxes and lithographed labels for them. You can see some fashionable gents carrying armloads of cigars, so they're not going to smoke them all at once. Corbell pioneered large 2-page color cartoons in the WASP and bright front and back covers. This one celebrates the arrival of Oscar Wilde, somehow objecting to him cashing in on the dandies, the aesthetic movement. He went up to see the gold mines and gave the miners a spontaneous lecture on Benvenuto Cellini. And one of the miners said, "Since he's so great, why didn't you bring him along?" And Wells said, "Because he's dead." Someone else said, "Who shot him?" In 1881, the Corbels sold up and moved to the Russian River to grow champagne grapes. The new owner brought in Ambrose Bierce as editor, who took on everyone, Jews, Irish, and Chinese, especially the latter. He also took on the big five robber barons who ran the railways. There's Crocker and Stanford in the eyes of the octopus. The octopus became a symbol of their grasping and was even used by Frank Norris for the title of a 1901 novel about them. Here in 1887, the Wasp portrays the overthrow of the Hawaiian king by revolutionaries. Of course, backing them were some powerful Yankees like Sanford Dole, owner of the largest sugarcane plantation. The secret goal of the new constitution was annexation by the US. When the US invaded the Philippines, Bierce said, "War is God's way of teaching Americans geography." The cartoon on the left was printed by Max Schmidt. And he printed thousands, millions of salmon can labels, fruit crate labels, and this lovely little promotional piece for his own business. As I say, this is the first title in my book, Dreaming on the Edge. WorldCat omits to mention the authoress, Julia Pond, calling her Sally Sparkle. The artist is Emanuel Wittenbach, and again, little is known about him, but I would like to add one piece to his catalog, the sheet music cover showing the original Cliff House in Seal Rocks, which you can see is straight out of the drawing above. Back then, it took over 3 months to get here by boat from the East Coast. Can you imagine 3.5 months on a sailboat around South America? I'm sure a lot of people got off in Rio and said, "Okay, that's good, I'll just stay here." Charles Murdoch came from New England 6 years after his father, who rushed to the goldfields and sent for his family much later, after he'd moved up to Humboldt. Charles made various glancing blows at printing, once not getting a job as an apprentice because it was given to Bret Harte, whom he knew and admired. Mr. Murdoch, as he became known, even his friends never called him Charles or Charlie, was actively involved in community and church affairs and never made much money as a printer. In fact, the rickety stairs to his shop, over there at Hagar & Co., were crowded with people looking for a soft touch or a handout. The firm was not in Murdoch's name, as he always had a financier as a business partner, and who usually thwarted his ambition. His earliest partner was M.D. Carr, and it's Carr's name you can see under that live Yankee boat there, on job work like this typical billhead, which I acquired in a batch of similar shipping invoices. Their press shared premises with Hagar Type Foundry on Clay Street. They were above a fish market, and Mrs. Murdoch said the shaky structure was only held together by the smell of fish. It was shaky because all the presses in town had a giant motorized belt that ran under the street. Each of them had the pulleys, holes in the floor with pulleys bringing power from the belt to run the presses, which snapped from time to time, of course, under the strain. Murdoch is remembered for his good taste as a typographer, so his work is quiet but elegant. Timothy Reardon's Petrarch is a good example of his style. Instead of using every garish new type on the market, Murdoch would acquire whole series like Binney or Franklin, which was a modernized Caslon, and use the various sizes plus caps and small caps for effect. When Carr was away on a business trip, Murdoch conspired with the foreman, and together they ordered a run of Binney type from the L. Johnston Foundry of Philadelphia. And here I have to bring in my boy, Loy. William Loy was a printing equipment salesman and scholar. He worked at Tatum & Bowen, also on Clay Street, which was the agent for the Johnston Foundry of Philadelphia. He was a Unitarian, along with Murdoch, and they had another close friend, Judge Reardon, who'd served with distinction in the Union Army and was now on the California Supreme Court. Reardon had worked at the Mint, with Bret Harte, and was also close friends with Ambrose Bierce and Mrs. Osborne, Robert Louis Stevenson's widow. The three fellows were members of the Chit Chat Club, which met to dine and hear papers on literary topics. Reardon, who collected books, was translating Sappho, and Loy was typesetting the work, a page at a time, and having the pages stereotyped for a future edition which never appeared. That is to say, a one-page sample was printed for the Printers International Specimen Exchange. You can see on the right there. Reardon was a confirmed bachelor, but finally got married and died soon after. His book, Petrarch and Other Essays, appeared posthumously with an introduction by Ambrose Bierce. The illustrations were done by Bruce Porter, and in this copy in the Bancroft, there's a repro of the artwork used for stamping the cover and spine tipped in. And Porter's work is very much in the new sort of arts and crafts style that had swept into America from Europe. There's Inland Printer cover, and also the Yellow Book and the Century Guild Hobby Horse with an essay by William Morris showing the tight typesetting and the decorative initials that were part of this aesthetic manifestation. The Lark involved a lot of art printed from Linebrocks, and Burgess and Porter were broke, so they found a bale of cheap bamboo paper in Chinatown, which they wanted Murdoch to use. Unfortunately, the lumps of bamboo broke the type, so he resorted to stereo plates, and unfortunately, they still got mashed up by the paper. The Lark appeared monthly for 2 years and was quite a sensation in Europe as well as North America. From it sprang a book of the poetry of Yone Noguchi, Seen and Unseen, 1897, printed in Caslon type, again with more Bruce Porter designs for the initials and that lovely cover there. The same year, Doxy also published The Voice of the Valley by Noguchi, Caslon type. Noguchi was the first Japanese poet published in the USA. He had a son, Isamu, with an Irish woman, Leonie Gilmore, he'd hired to teach him English. For legal reasons, they could not get married, but Yone was a philanderer. He denied that she was pregnant and went back to Japan. Finally, Leonie followed with their child to discover he'd married and settled down, and his Japanese family wanted nothing to do with him. He asked them to leave and never return and not use the Noguchi name. This, of course, had a huge impact on the boy who grew up to be America's greatest sculptor. I'm just going to touch briefly on Bertha Smith's Yosemite Legend. Someone else is going to be talking about these early San Francisco publishers like Paul Elder. But this is remarkable because of the Florence Lundborg illustration. She was part of the crew that put the Lark together, and she'd studied with Whistler in Paris. It was printed by the Poltroon Press in Cheltenham type with colored line blocks, only 2 colors actually, as you can see, as opposed to the 7 or more woodcuts that she would cut for her covers and posters for the Lark. But the moody quality of her art comes across really well. In my survey of book arts in the state, I discovered Ida Meacham Strobridge. She was a Mills graduate. I believe she studied bookbinding, and she married a rancher, and they moved up to Nevada. But in the winter of 1888, the cattle froze, and her husband and sons died of pneumonia. So she sold up and moved to the sunny climes of Pasadena, where she opened the Artemisia bindery. She also started writing short stories about the Nevada desert, which were published in the LA Times, the San Francisco Call, and a magazine edited by Charles Lummis called The Land of Sunshine. She gathered these into a trilogy, and Miner's Mirage Land 1904 was the first. The display type is called Roycrofter, which Steve Sachs described as moth-eaten. The text type is a face called Ionic. So it's pretty drab typography, but when she switched printers, the looks of her book remained the same. So I believe she set them herself and had the pages stereotyped. The rule work, which is very unusual, you see under the heading and down the margins, that would help the stereotyper get a clean matrix. They're very much in the Roycrofter style, but she hired Maynard Dixon as illustrator, and that lifts her books beyond the mundane into the realm of superlatives. It was far from a sun-baked idyll in the northern part of the state. The April 1906 quake is the big dividing line to the state's modern history. A group of soldiers delegated to fight the fire made a stand on Jackson Street, running hoses from the bay a mile from Fisherman's Wharf to protect Hoteling's Whiskey Warehouse. They had their priorities right. Society photographer Arnold Genth went to a wrecked camera store and picked up a fast portable camera and film, then walked uphill to Dolores Park, taking photos along the way. Loy's premises were destroyed. Murdoch's premises were destroyed by earthquakes twice. This is them and his premises in 1900. The second time in 1906, he visited the ruin, and it didn't look too bad. The two linotypes were still there and all of his presses, but there was no way to drag them out of the building. And the next morning, the army dynamited the premises to prevent the spread of fire, so everything was lost. The Printer's Day outing from 1901 was a reminder of the bygone halcyon days. It's a wonderful little brochure that has ads by all the printers and then a list of all the events that were going to have sack races and egg and spoon races and so on. And the prizes were all a bumper of champagne, a case of hock, you know, all this stuff. The Book Club of California was founded in 1912, the year in which the Titanic was lost and the Piltdown Man was found, said James D. Hart. One aspect of cultural maturity in a region, according to Jake Zeitlin, is clubs organized to encourage good printing, and another is printers interested in producing fine books in the tradition of the great printers of the past. And this is where the oft-raised comparison between San Francisco and Venice becomes insidious. Now I ask you why, in 1912, on the cutting edge of America, a club should be formed to perpetuate the style of work which had died with the closure of the Kelmscott Press many years before. Nevertheless, William Morris's ideals directly affected it, says Jim Hart. Edward DeWitt Taylor, poet and mayor, was the chairman of the new organization and printed their first work. The second, 2 years later, was undertaken by his protege, John Henry Nash, who had left the Taylor firm to set up on his own. With rich patrons like Adolph Sutro, William R.K. Young, head of the C&H Sugar Company, and Albert Bender, insurance broker and philanthropist, Nash was given rein to produce sumptuous editions of local authors George Sterling, Bret Harte, and Ambrose Bierce. In a decade, the club produced 10 works, mainly by California authors and printed by Taylor and Taylor, Taylor, Nash and Taylor, or Nash solo. I would call Nash the Trump of book arts, but there are other more recent, better contenders for the title. Like Bosky, Nash was a Canadian who settled in San Francisco and produced books in the manner of William Morris and other European private presses whose work he collected and emulated. In 1975, I introduced one of his former employees, Thomas MacDonald, who characterized him as an egotist, but above all, as a terrific salesman. Mr. Nash loved titles, and he had a doctor's degree from Mills College and some sort of honorary degree from Oregon. He was a professor, and would go up there and spend a week with some of the kids at Eugene. My interview with MacDonald was printed in the Book Club Quarterly. There's a little article called Black Mac, the Hand Press, back in 1975 or 6. In 1916, Nash printed the Book Club's second book, a poem called The Man with the Hoe by Edwin Markham. It's a 3-page poem spread out into a 78-page book. Jim Hart described it as an elaborate book in 3 colors with a floral border surrounded by another border of rules that even was carried over to the tops of the otherwise blank leaves. Yes, blank leaves with rules printed on them, a Nash hallmark. You can see we're only on page 34 of 78. For Norman Strauss and Nash, there is the fatal occasional unevenness in the importance of content and in creative concept to provide grist for a critic's mill. In short, his works were overinflated. In 1916, after falling out with Elder, Nash found a new client in William Andrews Clark Jr. Strauss wrote, Nash did not genuinely suffer during the Depression. He had sufficient commissions to maintain a good promotional front. Mrs. Estelle Dohany's 1931 Christmas card was an extravagant production. So was Nash's rumored bill of $25,000. This may be why she balked at underwriting his proposed edition of the Bible. He promised her special Van Gelder paper with her own watermark and sent her page proofs, but she didn't respond and the project collapsed. He also promised the Pope would bless the type. How this was to be done is hard to imagine. Essentially, Nash printed the same book over and over again. It's time we shoved him in this printerly atavism aside. His work is monumental and boring. Here's the vellum-bound prospectus for his edition of Dante. They don't have the Dante at the Bancroft, only this prospectus, which has 8 pages of text buried in 24 blank leaves. It's in his favorite typeface, Cloister. It's the least obtrusive of the arts and crafts typefaces, but doesn't look good in the large sizes he favored, especially when Nash creates blocks of caps and forgets to letter space them. His work is unmistakable in its pretension. As Jan Chickol pointed out in 1928, it is not the typographer's duty to put himself on display. After the 1906 quake, Nash relocated the Tomoe Press to New York. Now, don't imagine this required freight cars full of printing presses. He didn't have printing presses. His actual printing was done by the Stanley Taylor Company and other presses. He just had a mitering machine and a little hand press for proofing his work. He printed, in quotes, this edition of 2 short stories by Ambrose Bierce, whom we are pleased to claim as a California, San Franciscan author, although I think he was from Ohio. He was certainly among the best contemporary writers about the Civil War, and these 2 thrilling tales would look good with etchings based on Brady photos or line drawings and a nice journalistic type like Scotch Roman. But instead, in Nash's hands, the stories are shrouded in a Morris style that is totally inappropriate, bigly imposed on the page, tricked out with fiddly woodcut headpieces, all in all quite unfitting for Bierce. He printed literature in suffocating editions and subsequently ruined most of the early SF publishing he executed and influenced with his disconnect between content and appearance of product. He made San Francisco into a backwater of faux arts and crafts style, yet that is exactly the look still promoted as the San Francisco fine press style. What?
Oh,
What?
wow.
Wait, we're getting a question on Zoom. How do I get rid of the aphids? Detergent and warm water on your roses? He laid the cornerstone of his $100,000 mansion on March 12th, 1931. You see on the right, the invitation and the patrons who are going to be there. Sadly, it burned a few years later. Actually, he had no single patron, but played the field of those who had money, appreciation, and a desire for status. Thirdly, there was this promotion. No greater salesman of fine printing ever existed. In his mind, fine printing was truly one of the great arts. He made many people believe this. Oscar Lewis, noted California historian and typographical critic, wrote, John Henry Nash had an unquestionable flair for showmanship. More than any other printer of modern times, he dramatized his craft. I spotted one of these gigantic Nash book plates in one of my own books and peeled it up to reveal a more modest book plate underneath. I thought that was quite telling. World War I interrupted the old world for 4 years. This poster was drawn by Harry Hops, a Californian artist. The book club was on hard times as books were not selling. Clark Ashton Smith's Odes and Sonnets from 1918, illustrated by Florence Lundborg, printed an edition of 300 by Taylor & Taylor, took 27 years to sell out. But Taylor & Taylor are one of the unsung heroes of Bay Area printing. They have the capacity for gravure, lithography, and excellent typography, as Taylor's son, Henry Taylor, had studied with Updike at Harvard Business School. 2 young Hoosiers called Grabhorn, hearing about Nash and his shower of gold, came west and set up shop in a 5th floor loft on Kearney and Market and printed leaflets advertising their services. It might be next door, actually. It was. Albert Bender handed them their big break, a commission from the book club, which they executed in the same type and style, even using the same red ink as Nash in his latest club printing. This work was praised and brought them another job. This time they were even more on guard and even more imitative, says Hart. They laid on the floral decorations and, of course, ruled borders everywhere. Hey, blank pages with printed rule. Haven't we seen that before? By the time of their 5th commission, the Grabhorns were ready to branch out. Now they bought gaudy antique type and buried it in the paper. Jim Hart says, in this one, Ed Grabhorn did not merely let the type kiss the paper lightly and discreetly, but now was embedded in it through a passionate embrace that the eyes can see and the fingers feel. The strong masculine approach of the Grabhorns is at last fully evident. Thus, the Grabhorns printed 11 of the next 16 books issued by the club, leaving the other work to Nash, who was doubtless gnashing his teeth. The Grabhorns went from little mice nibbling around Nash's heels, as Norman Strauss characterized them, to having the lion's share of the work, using Nash's own techniques of creating overblown works for wealthy patrons. And like Nash, they were entrepreneurs, but not artists. The arts and crafts hangover ruined the fine press and small press scene. I still see Gaudi types, which were fashionable a century ago and should have been melted down after 1930, employed everywhere as bottles of fine type. They're gaudy as well as Gaudi, and their quirks prevent comfortable legibility. They were useful for new car ads in the 30s, but isn't it time we moved on from that look of 100 years ago? It's also high time we were disabused of the myth that fine printing in California begins and ends with John Henry Nash and the Grabhorns. The Grabhorns chose flat, simple artwork from the likes of Millette Dean and Valenti Angelo that would not compete with the typography. They loved the medieval Koch-Jessenschrift and Gaudi's more extravagant black letter types, lower right. The one at the bottom was a proprietary type that was lost when they asked some winos to help them move their press over to Commercial Street, and the winos got tired of carrying the type and threw it in the dumpster. I don't know if you ever went over there, but the stairs just went up like on a ship. So it was understandable why that would happen. They aped Nash's style of making monumental big tombstone books, but their typography is archaic or clumsy when they tried for the grandiose. As William Hazlitt might have said, it offends the nostrils of posterity. The Grabhorn's apprentice, Greg Anderson, wrote to Ward Ritchie, I find Ed's utter disregard for the logical arrangement and correctness of the text getting on my nerves now and again. His inability to make a book that can be read standing in the way of my appreciation of his other good and true qualifications as a book printer. However, the brothers were real characters. They were members of Eclampus Vitus, which is that wacky fraternal organization. But their work was appreciated because of their personalities, and once they died, the appeal began to fade. They put out more work than Nash because they lasted longer, and this gives them a chance to redeem themselves somewhat. Here's one book by them that I do find attractive and well designed, and it's not full of their conscious archaisms and fake medievalism. Jane Grabhorn, Bob's wife, was the talented member of the operation. In 1941, she teamed up with William Mad Dog Roth, heir to the Matson shipping fortune, to start Colt Press. I think Al Sparrison was involved as an art director. They published a lot of great books printed by other presses around town, notably Paul Goodman's The Grand Piano and Janet Lewis's Wife of Martin Guerre, with fine abstract decorations by Valenti Angelo. While the majority of the book club's books came from the Grabhorn Press, in 1931, the club reached south to commission a book from Ward Ritchie and Greg Anderson. Other young presses got a job or two, but the majority of the club's work came from the Grabhorns. Merrill Armitage was another key figure in the book art scene of Southern California, and his books have a New York imprint because he didn't think buyers would take an LA imprint seriously. Ritchie's work was graced by his collaborations with the great designer Alvin Lustig, who sadly died at 40. But when we talk about ink on paper, and not the aesthetics of design, we see clearly that the only exceptional printer in California in terms of consistent, high-quality work was the Poltroon Press of Saul and Lillian Marks. In contrast to the macho style of the Grabhorns, there's the feminine grace, as Jim Hart styled it, of the Poltroon Press. Though they printed a keepsake in 1935, it was not until the 60s they were given a book to print. Their touch was light, their taste impeccable, and their work is superb. Someone will be talking later this weekend about their work for the Pazifische Presse, and so I'll defer to them. Now, moving on back to my book, here are some footnotes that I want to expand upon. I'm sure you've all read the book, so bear with me. Achilles Rizzoli lived with his mother on Alabama Street over on Potrero Hill. He went to work as an architectural draftsman, seemingly had no friends or interests outside of work. At home, he continued drafting, creating fantastic monuments inspired by the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition. After his death, his home was vacant. Seeing passers-by ransacking his derelict house, a woman found a roll of his drawings and brought it to the Ames Gallery in Berkeley. Bonnie Grossman, owner of the gallery, tracked down Rizzoli's family and found more of his work, which was suddenly reevaluated at $100,000 per drawing. Today, we would write him off as an incel. But his creativity also led to a lot of writing, mostly poetry that can be best called obtuse. He self-published this book, The Colonnade by Peter Metermaid. See the last 3 lines? His hostess understood. Then you're afraid of maid, but not of colonnades? 300 copies, yeah, don't ask me. 300 copies were printed by a press on Minna Street, and the remainder wrapped in bundles in a closet in his home and were doubtless taken to the dump when the house was finally cleared out. I couldn't see this for my book, but one copy is known, and now Brown University has put a PDF online, which shows it to have had intriguing artwork, even if the text is impenetrable. Eureka Press was at 447 Minna, the Dempster building, built in 1907, 4 printers. And this is undoubtedly the scarcest work in this survey. As Thomas Osborne said in a really great article called The Ordinariness of the Archive, we may possibly learn more about an era from those worst sellers that appeared and then virtually vanished. This is certainly a remarkable, almost lost example of an artist's book. For reasons I won't go into, I compiled Dreaming on the Edge in a few months. As a result, I overlooked some important figures. First is Giacomo Patri, who wrote The White Collar, a novel in lino cuts, 1938, and the tradition of wordless picture books by Frans Masriel and Lind Ward. It took him 3 years to produce the first edition of 150 copies, which contains 122 cuts, some printed in gray or orange. While there's no text, there's lettering on buildings, flags, and so on. The gist of the novel is that labor needs to organize in order to prevent greedy politicians dividing the working class from the middle classes, or white collar versus blue collar. Patri worked as an illustrator for the SF Chronicle during the war, World War II, creating spot art for This World and Between the Lines. After the war, he taught at the California Labor School alongside Emmylou Packard, Imogen Cunningham, Anton Refregier, and others, until it was closed due to McCarthyism. I love Packard's multicolored lino cuts printed on a Vandercook, but she never created a substantial book as far as I know. Japanese immigrant Chiro Obata and his wife had a studio on Telegraph Avenue where she taught Ikebana. He taught painting at UC Berkeley from 1935, where he had a profound effect on many students. Today, there's a mural across the street from their studio based on one of his paintings of Yosemite. Hokusai, printed by Ben Kennedy of the Gillick Press, is the only book illustrated by him that I've been able to find, but it's a real beauty. In 1927, he and Worth Ryder loaded up the Model T and drove to Yosemite for the summer. This was a profound experience for Obata and his communion with great nature, as he called it. But in 1944, he was rounded up like other Japanese. In fact, someone shot a pistol through the front window of his Telegraph Avenue studio. Friends on the Berkeley faculty kept the building for him and restored his job after the war. Here on the lower left is a group of Japanese who were incarcerated during the war, protesting at the San Bruno BART station just last Saturday. While incarcerated, Obata taught art to children and always loved the great outdoors. After the war, he frequently drove up to Yosemite for a week or two, plein air painting with Worth Ryder. Today, there's a stretch of highway named after him, as well as annual workshops in August called the Obata Art Weekend. I mentioned the Gillick Press of Ben Kennedy. It was active from the late 30s to the early 50s. He printed for Wilder, Bentley, and Byrne Porter, including Robert Duncan's first book, Heavenly City, Earthly City. Byrne Porter and George Leighty are the major Bay Area publishers of the 1940s and had their books printed by a variety of presses, mainly as they could scrape together funds to get them done. But here's a problem with the California tradition, as I see it. No one reads anymore. If you read Circle magazine, you become aware of great writers like Weldon Keys, who was in the jazz band with Adrian Wilson. You'll find Larry Durrell, Henry Miller, many others. Ben Kennedy of Gillick is a mainstay of these publishers. Sadly, there's no Ruth Tizer interview of him and not much immediately available about him that I could find. In 1946, Gillick printed Kenneth Patchen's Panels for the Walls of Heaven, which would be a really great work if it had not been printed in blue ink on crummy paper, but the war had just ended and there were paper shortages. Okay, almost done. Another footnote, Wallace Hebbard was a Santa Barbara publisher, active from the 20s through the 60s. I met him in 1970, and he was quite spry. He was marketing Bancroft's History of California in 7 volumes. He told me that to ensure people opened the mail and didn't immediately throw it out as junk, he would put a packet of California poppy seeds in every envelope so that it rattled. In 1968, Graham McIntosh had moved to Santa Barbara and printed Brodigan's Please Plant This Book, which was a folder containing seed packets with poems printed on them. Now, Hubbard had already published this book, Wild Gardens of Old California, in 1927. That book had a collection of seed packets laid in at the back, too. I doubt there are many surviving copies with the seeds intact, but I'm certain that Graham had run across him. In order to keep the chapters of my book compact, I intentionally focused on only one title from each press or group I discussed. Among contemporary women printers, I accidentally omitted one important Bay Area book artist, Lee McClellan. That was a serious oversight. Her book, Hawaii One Summer, has, in retrospect, become of the key works of the artist book movement in the Bay Area. The artist is Deng Ming Dao, now a well-known Taoist author and woodcut artist. The author, Maxine Hong Kingston, is famous for her novels The Woman Warrior and Tripmaster Monkey, a cathartic novel about the heritage of Chinese Americans. McClellan hand-set and printed the book on Kozo paper and also bound it herself. It is a beautiful example of what small presses are capable of outside of the mainstream and away from the hum of commercial considerations. But this book is an exception. There is usually a distinction to be made between fine or private press work and artist books. If well done, they can bridge both, though in general we think of fine presses as staid, technically perfect, packaged textual reliquaries, and artist books as sloppy, hanging by their nails, ideas that are edgy but not always clearly interpreted. In this work, McClellan succeeds in both. And again, we've jumped off the edge of the continent as the Pacific beckons. Thank you.
Well done, sir.
Say that loudly.
Well done. And you did it in like
40 minutes. That's why I printed it out, so I wouldn't
Wow.
go,
No, you did a great. How about that, everybody? That's why you earned the Lieberman Lecture after almost 50 years of this organization. So I'm just going to open it up to questions
or comments.
or comments. Comments.
I'd like to suggest, since I've had it in 1974, we salute Alastair on the 50th anniversary of Poltroon Press, which he founded with Francis Butler. Spring of 75, Alastair?
Spring of 75, April Fool's Day.
Yeah, it's been a long 50 years.
Thank
But
you.
we have probably the most important man in our time in San Francisco, the late Jack Stout.
Yeah, I did. But he's in my book. So I left out, there's a lot of people I didn't talk about who you can read about in my book. I have a lot about Jack in my book.
And you have here, at my right, Patrick Ray, who has all the plant press equipment.
I know that.
And his
And I
stuff
did
is
mention,
perfect.
Plant and Press in glowing terms.
You did.
So read his book and we, have this.
Read.
Okay.
Dreaming on the Edge, Poets and Book Artists in California.
It's also listed on our website with his full biographical sort of information. Check that out.
And that's readily available.
Oak Knoll Press published it. I believe you can get it from them. If not, write to me. Or no, Amazon or not Amazon, ABE Books, which is owned by Amazon, but what can you do?
It might even have it in most books, right, Alice?
I think there's a copy. I think there's a signed copy of Moe's books, in fact, upstairs on the 4th floor, inscribed to the director of the Berkeley Art Museum. So I know who sold it.
Anybody else? Any comments? Did we have anything online?
No, we don't. We just have lots of thanks. This was great. Loved seeing everything. I'll share the comments.
Did they sort out the thing with problem with their aphids?
No comments.
We don't know about the aphids.
So Alistair, what's the next book?
What's my next book?
Yeah.
I've finished writing 2 books, but I can't seem to get them printed. One of them is my book, Rambling in the Vernacular, about folk lettering worldwide. Problem is it's 250 pages with half a dozen color photographs on every page. And then I've just finished writing a book about Georgian era typography called A Meadow of Margin, which is a survey of English language printing from 1702 to the coronation of Queen Victoria in 1835. So I've been working on that for the last couple of years. And that's where my real passion is. This California fine press stuff is rubbish.
That's not a bad judgment. It's a very reasonable judgment. Alice.
Yeah, compared to Thomas Bensley or William Bulmer.
So any more questions? We have about 7 minutes on our time clock.
My book is in Bell type, which I hand set. This is the original John Bell type, which Taylor and Taylor bought in 1924. And when they went out of business in 1960, Bill Barlow got it, and he was a private printer. And when he died, he left everything to Bancroft, and they didn't want to deal with his press because it was the case for the hazmat people. So they just wanted it all cleared out. And I quickly put dibs on the Bell type, because I'd written a book about the designer of Bell, Richard Austin, and it also did a type specimen of the Bell in here. So this is hand set with the original 18th century
Is that still
Bell type. Yeah, $90. It's yours. Letterpress printed.
So you love Dr. Bell?
Dr. Bell?
I do
Bell.
not love the Dr.
That's
Bell.
Fell. That's Dr. Fell. No, I'm not fond of Dr. Fell, no.
No.
But John Bell, strange guy, but yeah.
Any other comments, questions?
Come on, I rushed, so we would get, you want me to read the bits I cut out? No, I'm not gonna do that.
A lively back and forth. Well, you can continue the lively back and forth for a little while after we close out the Zoom. Is that okay?
Yeah, do
What
that.
Think of the printing of City Lights books, pocket books.
Please, let's not go there.
What about the Hour Hunt Press?
What about them?
Well, you're the one that helped recreate them.
That was the beginning of all my troubles.
Your glory.
When I said I was gonna write a bibliography of the Hour Hand Press, and Clifford Burke said to me, no, don't do that. Let sleeping dogs lie. But
Can you explain how Robert Hawley was talking about handy beds?
no,
Okay, that's it. That's a no. Wendy, thanking our speaker. And thanks to the American Printing History Association for being with us this evening and bringing us an incredible program.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for joining us and being here for it and for being online for this program. We hope to see you at another book club program in the future. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.